Welcome to our What's New scenario presentation from ForeFlight. Who's with us this morning for our What's New overview? I had a few people. So we've gotten so many features over the last 2 years since the last time we were at Oshkosh. 24 releases of ForeFlight. Over 100 new features in the app to play around with. So it's so much. This year we decided to split it into 2 different What's New presentations. So earlier we were looking through just a list of the features. And now we're going to take those new features and we're going to put them to work in the airplane for us. So we're going to look at a scenario, an actual flight we can use to go through and use some of those new tools. My name is Thomas Darty. I'm the Logbook product manager at ForeFlight. That means that my team deals with the logbook, the track log, and the checklist. So if you've got any specific feature requests, I'm your guy. Love to hear them. Come up afterwards and we'll talk to you. If you don't get anything else out of the presentation except for this slide, it'll be worth it. This is our pilot support team. That is who you can email if you ever have any questions or issues on how to use ForeFlight. They are all pilots. They are all ForeFlight experts. The best thing about them being pilots is you don't even need to know what you want to do in ForeFlight. You tell them what you want to do in the airplane. They've been there. They know the situation. They can give you tools and help you get through that. Very valuable team to have. Worth it for being a ForeFlight customer. And we've got a lot of them with us over in Hangar C. So if you go straight past the universities over here, into Hangar C, into our big booth over there, we're smack dab in the middle of the hangar. You can get a live demo on any of the features that we're going to look at today. You can go and see, make sure your account's all set up. You can upgrade, take advantage of some of our show specials. Get a 5% discount on a Sentry, our portable ADS-B unit. Tons of great reasons to go and see us in Hangar C. So since we're talking about what is new in ForeFlight, we need to make sure that we have the newest ForeFlight. So what is the newest version of ForeFlight? And that is ForeFlight 13.5. You can get that on any of these devices. These are the oldest devices that ForeFlight can run on there. So as long as you've bought something newer than 2014, you should be able to go through and get the newest version of ForeFlight on your device. And you can grab that by going to the Apple App Store and searching for ForeFlight Mobile EFB. That's where you can download the latest version of ForeFlight. That's what runs updates every time we put out a release. So let's look at the route of flight we're going to use today for our scenario. We're going to go in just a little bit of a cross country here from my home base in Austin, Texas, up to Oshkosh so we can enjoy AirVenture. A long cross country like that, I'm going to want to make sure that I leave on the best day possible. I got a lot of weather along that route. And I want to see, are we going to go in on Tuesday or are we going to go in on Wednesday? And ForeFlight's got a new tool called Daily Weather that I can use to make those sorts of decisions further out while I'm in that initial planning stage of a long trip like this. So I'm on the Airports tab, under Weather, and this is where I normally look up my METAR, my TAF. Those nice color-coded and decoded weather that I use inside of ForeFlight. But I've got a new option a little bit further down called Daily. If I tap on that, I can actually bring up a 10-day weather forecast. So we've partnered with the weather company from IBM to give you a global, any point along the globe, 10-day forecast translated into pilot speak so that you know exactly what you're going to get anywhere around the globe. You can zoom around, look at the weather at different days. So here we are Thursday night, looking like I might get a little MVFR, maybe some IFR a little later on. I can see specific details along the top, like my density altitude. If you're flying in hot airports, that density altitude in the forecast can be very useful for figuring out, should we wait till tomorrow morning? Or is it always going to be pretty hot for us? One of the things that I really like is this bar along the bottom. You'll notice that we've got a lot of green and then some different patches of blue and red. That's letting me know what the flight category is for each of those days along the bottom of the daily forecast. So I've got a lot of daily VFR with some sporadic evening showers. That's giving me that MVFR and that IFR along the way. So at a glance, I can see exactly what day is going to be the best for a long trip up to 10 days out. So I can start doing some of that tactical planning further out. Speaking of figuring out if how we're going to fly, let's look at our cloud coverage. So I'm on the maps page, looking at my layer selector, and I have a new layer in here called clouds. And when I bring that up, I get what kind of looks like a radar forecast, but these are cloud bases in here. So I can go through and see my clouds, my altitude selector along the right-hand side. I can slide up and down and see how that's going to be affected at different altitudes. And I can bring my slider along the bottom from current into a 21-hour forecast. So I can step through and see what the clouds are going to be doing over the next day. Maybe we can just divert off to the east here a little bit or off to the west, and I can avoid some of that system. I can stay VMC as we go along, and I don't have to worry about nearly as much. We'll save all questions towards the end here. We'll have plenty of time. So this is very helpful for, again, making those strategic decisions on, are we going to head off a little bit to the west or head off a little bit to the east? We've also introduced a new map sidebar. This is very helpful in planning these longer trips. So previously inside of ForeFlight, if you press and held onto the map, you would get a little pop-up, give you details about where you were tapping and holding on the map. But it would pop up right where you tapped and held. And it could potentially cover different things on the map. It's not very useful if you're trying to look up information. So in a recent version of ForeFlight, we moved that information into a drawer that slides in from the right-hand side. It makes it a lot easier to still pan and zoom around while having that information that you were looking at on the map. And let's look at one of my favorite ways to use that new functionality. Who here uses the fuel layer inside of ForeFlight? This will pay for ForeFlight, the first cross-country you make with it. So in that same layer selector that we looked at earlier, on the right-hand bar, I've scrolled down to the very bottom and I've selected 100 low lead, the fuel that my aircraft is going to burn today. And now I see updated fuel prices for all of the airports in the US here as I fly around. So I can go through and see exactly what we're going to pay all the way along our route. More importantly, I can avoid airports that are going to be more expensive. Now, about halfway between a long cross country here, about a good time for a fuel stop, I've got a good price in there. I've got $3.55. That's not bad. That's a good price for 100 low lead. So I'm going to press on that. And you'll notice that not only do I highlight where I tapped and held on the map there with that green circle around my 355, but my app drawer along the right is going to allow me to look at airport details. I can look under the FBO section and I can see what the fuel price is at that airport, what FBO is giving me that fuel price, details and comments about that FBO, all available to me. But since it's on that sidebar now, I can still pan and zoom around the map. I can look to see if there's a better fuel price somewhere else along my map, or along my route, without actually losing my good fuel price that I found there originally. So I can use that to make it a lot easier to find it, to make a decision on where we're going to stop. Doesn't look like I've got any place conveniently along my route with a better fuel price. So we can just go back and hit add to route along the top of that airport. And now I have my fuel stop planned. It's a long flight. We're an instrument-rated pilot. I think I'm going to file IFR, and maybe we'll file a couple of approaches as we fly in. Who's noticed a recent change on the plates tab inside of ForeFlight? We've now changed it to introduce flight binders. These are a very handy way to get all of your approach plates, your taxi diagrams, your departures, your arrivals into your airports along your route in an organized fashion along the left-hand side of the plates view. ForeFlight's going to intelligently bring these in for me. So I have, whatever route, whatever approach, whatever departure is already in my route is going to fill in here automatically. So let's look at how we can do that. On the maps page, I'm just going to go ahead and use the route advisor to make a route for myself here. So I've just tapped on routes. ForeFlight's going to auto plan one for me. And now I have a departure procedure, waypoints into my airports as we go along. When I go back to the plates binder and I hit add flight binder along the top there, ForeFlight's going to intelligently select a couple of routes that I might want. So I've got one on my maps page. It's going to ask me if that's the flight that I'm trying to plan these plates for. I've got one on my flights tab where I do my briefing and filing. It's going to ask me if that's the flight that I want plates for. So we'll go ahead and select the maps one. That's where we've been doing all of our flight planning. And now ForeFlight's going to bring in my airports. It's going to bring in my, my departure out of Austin, my fuel stop there. It's going to bring in my airport diagram out of Austin, my departure procedure straight into my flight binder. I don't have to do anything extra to add those. If I want to change airports, I can just tap on any of the airport names and see any different airport around. So maybe I change my mind. I want to fly somewhere else. I can easily change the airport. So if I've got another stop that I want to make, easy enough for me to add it. If I want to add an approach or change any of the plates that I have visible in my flight binder, I can just tap on the category of plate that I want to look at, and ForeFlight will show me all of the available procedures I have. So all the available approaches, all of the available arrivals that I may have into those airports. And I can select the little checkbox next to the one that I want, and now it's added into my plate. I can even change ones that ForeFlight has already selected by doing the exact same thing. Now, why am I going to go through and take all the effort to set up my approaches, my departures into this flight binder so that I have it ready to go? Well, because once I've got these all in order, I can actually use a quick tip to move back and forth between those plates as I proceed along my flight. So I can take 3 fingers on that plates tab there and swipe back and forth, and I can actually slide between each of those plates. So it makes it very handy for me as I'm taxiing out of my departure airport. I get to my runway, I swipe over. I've got my departure procedure. Once we're en route, I can swipe over. I've got my arrival. Swipe again, I've got my approach. If there's a specific plate that I want to take a look at, I can also select any of them along the side, and that will take me to whatever plate I have as well. Very easy way to stay organized and ahead of the airplane when we're on long IFR flights. Now that I've got all this planned though, I've got to make sure that it's downloaded and saved onto my device for use in flight when I don't have internet. Previously, that meant going to my downloads tab or going to pack inside of ForeFlight, hitting download, and then waiting, not being able to use my iPad for other things, other planning that I might want to do on that device. Not anymore. ForeFlight can now do all of that downloading in the background. So I can go to More in the lower right-hand corner and Downloads and hit download of all of my required updates, and ForeFlight will just download all of those for me. I don't need to leave it up in front on my iPad. I can shut it down. I can close down ForeFlight. I can do other things on my iPad, and it will continue to download all of that. If you combine that with automatic downloads that you can turn on in ForeFlight to automatically keep yourself updated, you really don't even have to go to the Downloads tab. ForeFlight will just continuously update all of the procedures, all of the airport diagrams. It's so much easier. So what can we do while ForeFlight is downloading all of this data for us? What other planning things can we do? Well, I'm coming into Oshkosh, and maybe my aircraft has a mass arrival. Maybe we've got a plan that we want to use while we're flying into Oshkosh. Maybe I've got some documents I want right there in ForeFlight for review. Well, dragging and dropping files is a way that I can make that even easier. Last year, ForeFlight introduced the ability for me to go through and split my iPad screen and bring up another app on there. So I can swipe up from the bottom of my iPad, see other apps that are in my app drawer, and slide those up and split my iPad screen. So I have ForeFlight on one side and another app on the other. So what I've done here is brought up the Files app on my iPad that contains a PDF of the information for my mass arrival into Oshkosh. So I've got that over on the right, and ForeFlight over on the left. Now there's my PDF, our mass arrival plan. I'm going to press and hold into the Flights app, the Files app there, and I'm going to drag it over into ForeFlight. And notice when I do that, my icon gets a little plus button next to it there, a little green plus up in the corner. That's letting me know that if I release my finger, that's going to automatically add that document into my documents file for ForeFlight. So now I don't have to go back and forth between different apps. It's directly inside of my ForeFlight documents catalog. Easy for me to reference. I can mark it up with the annotations. I have it right there, ready to go. Now, a couple of airplanes flying into Oshkosh here. I'd kind of like to know what the arrival's looking like. See how busy it is and everything. And a tool that we had a few years ago is through a partnership with FlightAware. We can now look at traffic the same way that you would over ADS-B when you're in the airplane over the internet. So you can go through and see traffic while you're on the ground and doing your initial flight planning. This is very handy for going through and looking at what the arrival is into a busy Class B airspace, how much traffic is around an uncontrolled field, and how are people flying around the traffic pattern. I can pre-brief that before I get into the airplane. Very handy tool. And now I can see all of that traffic in 3D. So I can use our 3D airport preview tools in combination with that traffic to really complete that picture of what arrivals look like at the airport. So I'm going to turn on my traffic layer on the Maps tab using the traffic layer selector there. And that's going to allow me to see all of those airplanes top down. I can tap on them for details. And I'm going to go over and select the airport that I want to see. And then on the Performance Plus plans, I have a little 3D view right up there in my app drawer. And when I tap that, I will be able to pan and zoom around my airport, looking at aerial imagery overlaid on top of our 3D terrain. And I can tap on an airplane and see its flight path and watch it fly into the airport as we go through. So I can watch somebody come down the Fisk arrival here and actually follow them. See how that arrival goes. Where are they turning? What is my sight picture going to look like as we come over to the airport? Looking at something like this can just make that briefing you have into the airport so much clearer. So it's less stressful when you're actually in the airplane trying to follow somebody doing the exact same thing. And I've got a pretty direct route between my airports, and I'm not necessarily certain that that's going to take the best advantage of my winds. And I want to see that we get the best tailwinds, or at least the worst headwind, or the least worst headwinds as we fly around. And so I'm going to use a couple of new layers we have called Dynamic Winds and Temps. These are on the Maps page. On the right-hand side of the layer selector, I have two new layers, Winds Temps and Winds Speeds. When I turn these on, I get an animated layer of winds anywhere around the globe. I can use the slider along the right-hand side to adjust my altitude up and down. And I can use the slider in the middle to adjust my forecast time from now up to a day in the future there. So I can use this layer to see what the flow of winds are and plan out a better altitude, plan out a better route. Should we dogleg off? Take more advantage of the tailwinds. If I go one direction, can I avoid a stronger headwind? If I change altitudes, is that going to work out better for me? If I press and hold anywhere in the globe with this layer on, up at the top there, I will get pinpoint information about what the wind speed and temperature is at that altitude. So I can see directly that I'm 8 knots, 197. So this is a tool that allows me to very visually and easily plan out where my route is that's best going to take advantage of those winds on a long trip like this. And then I can take the weather that we've been looking at from clouds and winds like that and start viewing that in 3D as I preview my flight. So on the Maps tab here with my flight plan drawer open, I'm going to select that little 3D globe with an airplane in front of it. And that's going to allow me to preview my flight in 3D. I can scrub through, I can see again that aerial imagery overlaid on terrain with my route depicted along it. I can see the exact altitudes, I can see 3D obstacles coming in our next update in there. Tons of useful information. But over in the corner, I've got what looks like the same button that I have on the maps page for the layer selector. And if I select maybe clouds, I now have that same clouds layer that we were looking at earlier, but now depicted in 3D along my route of flight. So I can adjust my altitude and I can pan and zoom around and see how those clouds are going to affect me. I can switch over to something like turbulence. If you've got somebody who does not like to fly around in a bumpy airplane, you can go through and pan through all of your altitudes and see if there's any way that you're going to be able to avoid turbulence on today's flight. This is a great way to take the features that ForeFlight has that both show you those forecasts top down and those forecasts in profile and combine it into a single image so you can really interpret what that weather looks like. Very handy to have. Now I'm fairly familiar with Bergstrom Airport. It's a good size field, former Air Force Base. They've got a couple of taxiways. And we've got a brand new feature that's actually so new, we're beta testing it with you guys. So we have a new program called ForeFlight Labs that allows you to opt into a beta of new features we are testing inside of ForeFlight. Our first introduction into ForeFlight Labs is the Taxi Route Advisor on our Performance Plus plans. I can go to my large airport here, plenty of taxiways, plenty of ways for me to get over to the airport. I can open up my flight plan drawer, and I can press that taxi route button in there. I can tap on my airport route bubble in that flight plan drawer, and I can see edit taxi route as an option there as well. And if I press either one of those, I get what looks like a new route advisor with a keyboard at the top. But that keyboard does not have just a regular QWERTY keyboard with all my letters on it. It starts out with places that I want to taxi to. So maybe I'm departing out of 18 left. I'm going to tap on 18 left. And ForeFlight's going to go ahead and predict a route for me, the most efficient route for me to get from my current location to the runway that I want to taxi to. Now, that's not necessarily my taxi clearance. That's just ForeFlight predicting what the most efficient way is. So as I get my taxi clearance read to me by ATC, the first thing they're going to tell me is taxi 18 left, via. I can go through and start using that keyboard to put in Lima. And notice how the keyboard changes every time I put in a new taxiway to go through and tell me what the next options I have off of that taxiway are. So I can go through and hit Bravo, Alpha. And then when I close that off, my taxiway route gets brought directly over to my aeronautical map. So I have that here ready to give myself progressive taxi along a busy airport. I can see that on my airport diagram as well. It's very easy for me to take a look at that. I can also put in hold shorts or cross runway clearances. So I have all of that information saved and ready to go right in here. Now this is an opt-in feature. If you are on the Performance Plus tier, you can go to your account view under More, scroll down and you'll see the ForeFlight Labs logo down there, and you can opt in to Taxi Route. Play around with it. Now it is in beta, so as you're playing around with it, as you're looking at airports, if you do notice anything, please write in. Let us know what we can improve about this. Let us know issues that you run into. That's the entire point of having this in labs, is so we can really make this a critical feature, something that works very well inside of ForeFlight. Now we've been looking at a lot of weather, and there's one more way to look at weather I want to take a look at here. So as we take off out of the airport here, I've got a lot of clouds showing up on my cloud layer. And I don't really want to spend too much time in those clouds. Maybe I'm worried about icing. Maybe I just don't want to be in IMC all that long. I want to get out above it. I can go into my flight plan drawer, and in the lower right-hand corner, select Profile. That allows me to see the profile of my entire route as we're planning it. I can also see the profile as I'm flying around. So I can see, is there terrain or obstacles or airspace coming up along my route? But I have a new option here. That same style of layer selector that we've looked at on the map here in 3D is available to me right here in Profile. And if I tap on that, I can see all of the weather forecasts that I can see in Profile view. So we can select clouds, and now I see that cloud layer depicted inside of my Profile view. And I can get a great sense of how big that cloud layer is, where it's going to be along my route. Are we going to be able to punch just straight through it, or are we going to be in it for quite a long time? So a very easy way to decide, oh, I'm going to need to reroute. This isn't going to work for us. Or is our current route the one we want? We won't be in it very long. One of the things that I always like to look at is fly around with radar on when we're flying, on ADS-B, even on a day that I think is going to be kind of clear. We've got some accumulation out there. We've got some clouds that are growing. I want to see if any of those are actually getting to the point where I need to worry about them. So I fly around with radar on. But I don't always remember what the radar return, what these colors mean on there. So ForeFlight has recently added the legend for all of our animated weather layers right there along the bottom of the map. So if I want to see exactly what a return is, exactly how bad something is, if I want to see those cloud layers we looked at earlier, I can see, what the different colors of gray mean as far as my clouds, what my icing means, my turbulence means. It's right there along the bottom. I no longer have to go to the pilot's guide to bring all of that up. So those clouds we were looking at climbing through, I can take a look at them and see if they're actually going to be a problem, if they've got any storms in them. Do we have any parachuters? I got a couple people jumping out. So I like to avoid people that are jumping out of airplanes when they're in the air as much as possible. And so ForeFlight has added parachute jump areas onto our aeronautical map. These are a publication from the FAA of known drop zones around the US. So I can zoom in now on my aeronautical map, and I can see the exact details of those parachute jump areas. These are areas where I know that I'm going to have parachute operations, and I need to be extra cautious as I go through them. I can press and hold inside of that parachute jump area, and I can bring up details about that specific PJA. So I can see who runs it, if it's got noted hours of operations, if there's a known frequency that I can contact people on, all the details that I might want so that I can safely traverse that area and not put anybody else at risk if they're out there skydiving. It's a nice, handy little feature to have. I think of it a lot like a MOA or an alert area, but specifically for parachute jumps. Now we are out of Texas. It's pretty hot up here in Wisconsin for this Oshkosh, but we get a little warm down there, and we run into iPads that overheat in the airplane. It just is a thing of having like a dome glass over the airplane. I put the iPad up on the dash. It just cooks up there, and iPads occasionally can overheat. And it's not very useful if I'm on an approach and my iPad dies because it's overheated. Kind of wanted that information. So we've added a new alert inside of ForeFlight. So if I'm flying along and I've left my iPad out in the sun, my mount is right there directly into the sunlight and everything like that, I might get this alert where ForeFlight is letting me know that my iPad is too hot and it might shut down if I don't take some actions here. This sort of is my enunciator for I need to take action now so I can keep my iPad up and running. So a few things that I can do if I get that alert. One, I can close down some background apps. I can go through, open up my app view, slide up on any apps that aren't ForeFlight that I'm not using right now, and I can shut down those background processes and make sure that my iPad is not working as hard. I can reduce my brightness as much as practical. A lot of us get out in the airplane, especially if you've got an iPad mounted up somewhere, you go into the brightness setting, you just crank it. Put it at full brightness in there. I want to be able to see that thing as bright as I possibly can. Well, that's running that engine at redline. We are just making the iPad work as hard as we can make it to be that bright. If I can pull it down just a little bit, maybe 10% in there, it's still pretty bright. But now I'm at 2700. I'm not at redline. That engine's working a lot easier. It's not gonna be quite as hot to try and run the screen at that brightness. If I've got an airplane that's got any kind of vents, I'm gonna point them at that device. Now, that may mean I have to point them off of myself, but I'm gonna keep my iPad up and running as much as I can. And if I have the option to move it out of the sun, if I've got it just sitting on a seat next to me and I've got sun coming in through that window, I'll move it over. I'll move it over onto a lap somewhere else, keep it out of the sun. That's gonna do a lot as well to keep it from overheating. Holds and unplanned holds are a pain as you go through, and it's something that I fear as an IFR pilot going through. Just, oh, I've got something, I got bad news. You're gonna hold unpublished, hold Southwest. I gotta plan my entry. It's not super easy. ForeFlight's got a new hold advisor that's going to take a lot of that guesswork out of it for me and make it a lot easier for me to plan to fly that hold. So let's say we're coming into Oshkosh. This isn't the weather from last night. It's Wisconsin, so this was maybe 2 nights ago in there. And I'm going to need to wait out a little bit of a line of sail there. I want that to clear out a little bit before I try and shoot an approach in. So I'm going to hold at one of my waypoints outside the weather here and let that clear off a little bit. Then I'm going to shoot in. So in my flight plan drawer, I can tap on that waypoint, the name of that waypoint. We got Bach here is what we're coming up on. And I can select hold. I can go through and tap on that waypoint on the map and also select hold. So I got a couple of places that I can access this from. And when I do, my flight plan, my route drawer along the side there is now going to give me my hold advisor. So I can, along the top, I can select what waypoint I want to fly out of. I can select things like my inbound and outbound direction. I can switch from time to distance, and I can set exactly how long I want that inbound leg to be. And notice one thing, right above where I've got this highlighted for time and distance, it says hold southwest of that. We put that little reminder in there. The way that ATC may tell me to hold around that point, along that VOR, on that VOR, on that waypoint, they may just say hold southwest of Bach in there. So we put that little decoder in there. So it's just a reminder that you've got everything set up. Once I do, and everything looks great for me, I can hit add to route, and ForeFlight will now put in a full hold with my entry along my route there. So now I've got that point, I've got my hold with my, 4-mile legs on here. I set up 4-mile legs, and I can just go through and I see exactly where I'm going to be. I have my entry planned for me. It's easier for me to go through and fly that hold. Something that I wasn't expecting that can be kind of intimidating, easy as can be now with Hold Advisor. Procedure minimums. What are we going to fly as our actual minimum down onto the approach? A lot of times it's pretty easy. You just find the bottom of the approach blade and it'll tell you what your minimums are. But if I'm flying into Oshkosh and I get the procedure button along the top there, select approach, and let's say we're going to fly the RNAV, look at all those notes up there. I've got a huge block of notes along the top of this approach in there. Those are telling me that if I have to use the Fond du Lac altimeter setting, I need to add maybe 40 feet to all of my DAs or my MDHs. It may tell me that I need to add 1/8 of a mile to all of my visibility, something that's very easy to do while you're single pilot IFR, dodging weather, flying in there. And that's only if all of the runway equipment is working. If my Mauser or my rails are out, I've got to add additional information to bring those through. Anybody know where that information lives? It's not on this approach plate. It's in the digital chart supplements, procedure supplements in the documents catalog from the FAA. They don't publish any of that information on their approach plates. When I select my initial approach fix now, though, I have all of this information along the left-hand side. Now, those of you that are familiar with flying with Jeppesen charts will know that this information is calculated for you in the minimums section on a Jeppesen chart. They actually go through and break out in their minimums exactly what you need to use for each of these conditions. If my runway is got all the equipment, if my what category my airplane is, all of that sort of stuff. Very handy. Well, because we got bought by Boeing a couple of years ago, we now have access to Jeppesen's entire database of those minimums, all of the things that they use to calculate all of that. So we brought them into ForeFlight. So I can go through and select the category of aircraft I have. I really like that we included the speeds of all of the categories here, just in case I've forgotten what each category is. I can select if I have any runway equipment out. I can go through and select the type of approach that I want. You'll notice that I've got some that are just the LPV, and I've got some that are the LPV with the Fond du Lac altimeter in there. So if I have to use that other altimeter setting, I can select the approach that I want and hit add to route. And now all of my fixes along my approach, including my minimum highlighted in magenta there, are correct for the type of approach that I am flying down. So that 1044 there, that is my actual minimum for today's flight based on my category and the conditions of the runway as they go through there. So that takes all of those notes into account. I didn't have to do any math. I didn't have to break out a different document to look all of that up. ForeFlight took care of all of that for me. This is a real game changer if you're single pilot IFR, maybe not everything's working, maybe you're flying into the not your original airport as you went through. It's very handy to have all of that done for you. You're flying the airplane, you're not sitting there trying to do a whole bunch of math. And then I can take that same procedure we're looking at now, and I can preview that in 3D. So I can look at all of those altitudes along all of those waypoints and see them depicted in 3D over that terrain, over that imagery. So it's very easy for me to understand what are the distances between each of those points. How much of a descent angle am I going to need as I fly in? Am I really going to have to cut power to drop down between a couple of waypoints? Or can I set myself up on just a nice, easy, smooth descent on the way in? This makes it very fast and understandable before I go fly the approach. And when I break out from that airport, I'm probably going to see something. Maybe we're flying in at night. So I'm on my airports tab here, and I have another 3D view button up here. This is one of the other places that I can view things in 3D along ForeFlight. Now this is the view that we looked at earlier with traffic, where I can pan and zoom around. I can see my runways. I can see traffic as they fly in and out of this airport. But I have a new button along the very bottom in the right-hand corner where I've got a little sun and a moon. And if I slide that over to moon, I actually now see this runway or this airport at night with accurately depicted runway and approach lighting systems as we go through. So I can tell exactly what type of lights this runway has when I break out on my instrument approach. You'll also see that I've got some red dots on the background up there. Those are towers and obstacles correctly depicted with the color light that is actually on top of that obstacle. So by previewing this, I can know what's out there. Is that an airplane or is that a tower out there that I need to look at? I can see all of those lighted towers. And if I pan and zoom around, I can see my animated approach lighting system to the point where my PAPI or VASI correctly depicts what my glide slope is going to look like in there. So I can set myself up on glide slope. I can see what my PAPI looks like. And now I've got a sight picture of that runway at night. Is it a particularly wide runway? Is it going to give me an illusion? Is it a short runway? I can use this tool to have that sight picture before I go fly the airplane. Make it that much safer before we go fly IFR at night. That was a fun flight. Now, I am the product manager of Logbook and TrackLog in there, so I do record all of my flights in TrackLog and turn them into draft logbook entries. And we have a new feature coming out in our next release called TrackLog Trim. So we have a recent flight here, and I manually start my TrackLog in there because I use it to match my Hobbs time as much as possible. I've actually modified my checklist inside of ForeFlight with a new checklist item to start my TrackLog record right after I check my engine instruments as we go through on my after engine start in there. So it's as close to that Hobbs time as I can really get it there. So maybe that meant that I recorded a little bit too much of my TrackLog. I want to trim a little bit off in there. So I now have will have an edit button in the lower right-hand corner of my TrackLog that will allow me to move the start and end points of my TrackLog. So I can go through and I can move my sidebar and set that start or end point. And I can press and hold inside of that TrackLog graph to get detailed information at that specific point. So I can go through and find exactly when we start moving our aircraft using my green speed line there, and then hit start here. And when I hit done, ForeFlight's going to save that TrackLog. Now the best thing about this is it's non-destructive. So if I hit edit again, I can just slide the TrackLog out and I've not lost any data. I've not permanently deleted anything off of my TrackLog. I've only given it a new start or an end point in there. This is a very handy tool if you're using that TrackLogs to create draft logbook entries. You can make it that much more accurate. It's a very handy tool. Using that digital logbook means that I don't have to go through and figure out when I need an IPC or if I'm current anymore. I know exactly when I can carry passengers because all of my currencies are automatically calculated for me in that logbook. So that's about 55 minutes of some of the things that are new inside of ForeFlight. We haven't even gotten to go through all of the features today. So there are so many more ways that you can learn more about ForeFlight. One of the best ones right there along the top is the Pilot's Guide to ForeFlight Mobile. That is the user's manual built directly into that documents catalog. So you can have that downloaded and saved onto your iPad for use in flight. You can, bring that up and say, hey, I want to put in a new waypoint type. Maybe I want to put in a bearing DME from a VOR. How do I do that? That Pilot's Guide will give me the answer there. I can also go to our YouTube channel, foreflight.com/videos. We're recording this presentation right now, and it's going to go up on that foreflight.com/videos, along with all of the other presentations we've been giving this week at Oshkosh. We also have tons of other webinars on there, from how to convert over to Logbook to how to teach and learn with ForeFlight to filing international, all sorts of great different topics. And every time that we produce a new feature inside of ForeFlight, we make a tutorial video and put it up there as well. So it's a very handy, free resource for you to use to learn how to fly along with ForeFlight. And then our blog and our newsletter. Most of you probably got an email from us recently about the fact that we were testing the new version of iOS. Every time that Apple releases a new version of their iOS software, the operating system on your iPad and your iPhone, ForeFlight takes that and we thoroughly test it through all of our functionality, portables, things like that, to make sure that we've not dropped anything important that aviators are going to need out there. And then that's when we send you that all clear email so that you know when you update the OS on your iPad or your iPhone, it's not going to interfere with your ability to fly the airplane. That's where those come from. You can check on the status on either our blog or our monthly newsletter. Once again though, if you have any questions and you can't find an answer on it, please reach out, team@foreflight.com. Talk to that pilot support team. Really take advantage of one of the best resources you have as a ForeFlight customer. Again, real pilots, they're on frequency. We've been hearing all week about, I wrote into you guys at 3 a.m. and by 3:35 I had a detailed breakdown of how to use that feature in there. They're such a good team. We're very proud of the work that they do. So with that, we've got a few minutes for Q&A here. I'm going to leave all of these resources up on the screen. So if you want to take a picture of that or take any notes about it, you've got that available to you. And that concludes our What's New scenario. Thank you all for coming today. Yes, sir, up in front.
Do you foresee ever depicting a glide slope or highway in the sky?
So the question is, do we ever see ourselves depicting a glide slope or a highway in the sky there? It's a very interesting feature. There's a couple of other products out there that do something a little bit similar. And while we don't necessarily have that, we do have our glided visor in there, which is something that's going to allow you to know that you can make a particular airport as you're up at altitude in there. I like that feature a lot. It's one of those that I always have on while I'm flying the airplane. As far as the actual approach highway in the sky information in there, it's definitely something that we're aware of and looked at, but no plans at this time. Yes, sir. So the question is, in our logbook, is there a way for me to go through and search it as a database to see how many hours I might have flown with a particular student or a particular passenger in there? Let's look at something real quick. I'll put this back up in just a second. But I've got my iPad here, and I'm going to go over to my logbook, and there's a couple of ways that I can do this. I can come down here to the bottom and look at people, and find a particular person that I've flown with. Now, this is my test logbook database here, so we'll have to find somebody that I actually have entries with. And I'll see my associated entries there. And I can go through and see I've got 10 flights with this person and I've got some information there. If I wanted to look up a particular airplane or anything like that, I could go into my all here, and I could look up a tail number. So maybe I want to look up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, a tail number I have a lot in this database. And I've now filtered all of my entries here and brought those to just those planes. So that's one way that I can use it as a database to look at some of that specific information in there. Yes, sir.
ForeFlight is really amazing to watch the development over the years, and you're absolutely excellent.
Thank you.
I have a question. Does ForeFlight have a seaplane IFR button?
A seaplane IFR button in the logbook, or are you looking for seaplane bases or?
Seaplane IFR button. I fly.
Oh, yeah, okay. So the question is, I'm in a seaplane and I want to fly IFR, the fun type of IFR, the I follow roads in there. So I'm going to go over to the maps page here, and I'm looking at the aeronautical map. I can go into that settings button, that little gear icon along the very top, and I can look at airports, and I can make sure that I have seaplane bases on. So I can really see all my seaplane bases there. And then when I want to figure out what highway goes between all of my seaplane bases there, along the left-hand side of the aeronautical map, I've got a little I-35, a little homage to our Austin base there for Interstate 35. And when I turn that on, I'll now see highways and interstates depicted on the aeronautical map. So as I zoom in here, you'll see all of those roads come in and be depicted. Now, I can't necessarily auto route you down I-29 here or anything, but I can go ahead and give you those highways depicted on the aeronautical map. So it should be pretty easy to press and hold and add a waypoint along there if you do want to follow some roads. Oh, yes, sir.
Track log, I exported into a common delimited file.
Yes.
And put that into Excel. The timestamp is as it went to Unix.
Yeah, I believe we're using that in Epoch in there for the timestamp in there. You should be able to go on, look up an Epoch converter, and convert that in there. So the question was, our track logs, they can be exported in a comma delimited system in there, a CSV, and the timestamp we use in there, I believe that's an epoch in there. So that's what you'd want to search. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
I know in the past on the phone OS you didn't have like procedure advisor, but then it was added later. I think the profile view is still not there. Is that going to be?
So we looked at split screen earlier as we went through. The question is profile view on iPhone. So that split screen, I can actually go through and I can change what portion of the screen is in that split screen. Well, if I slide ForeFlight kind of all the way over to the end, it's kind of a skinny view over there. It's about as skinny as an iPhone over there. So when we made that program, or we made that transition to allow for split screen, we had to entirely redesign how the app worked on the iPhone because it's now the same thing in there. Profile is the last piece of that project to come out. We talked about it a little bit earlier in our What's New overview. Ryan gave a preview. I don't know, maybe in the next release that may have that in there. Any other questions? Well, myself, Sam. Oh, yeah, sir.
Can I import my log 10 logbook data into ForeFlight?
So I've got a log 10 logbook for all of my information. Can I import that into ForeFlight? Yes, you can. You can actually go into go into your log 10 software, and they will have an export feature on there. So you just hit export, and you download your file of all of your logbook information from Log 10 Pro. You can then go on to plan.foreflight.com. That's our foreflight.com where you log into it and go to the logbook section and you'll see an import option. You just take your file from Log 10 Pro, drag it across into that import function, and it will bring all of that information across. If you want to have any guidance through that, team at foreflight.com. We've actually got specific experts in importing in logbooks. They'd be more than happy to help you through that issue. Yeah. Well, we're going to be hanging out around here for just a little bit, maybe off to the side here. Come up, ask us some questions. We'll be happy to talk to all of you. Thank you all for coming, and enjoy the rest of Oshkosh.